Since we made the last bass fishing video, which is some years ago now, there have been some real innovations in equipment, and one of the major changes has been the introduction of braided lines. Now, these braids are different from nylon. Nylon has a lot of stretch in it, and braids have got virtually none. And the lack of stretch gives you a number of advantages. Firstly, you can feel every movement of the lure on the end of the line. And secondly, and perhaps most important, when a fish does take, the hooks are pulled into its mouth with no stretch at all, no give. Very good for hooking fish. There are problems about using this line. It's extremely thin, which allows much longer casts, but it's so thin and soft that you have to be careful not to get tangles, and beginners often have problems with knots and tangles in the line. So what you do, firstly, don't overfill the spool. You can afford to be anything up to 1/8 of an inch under the lip of the spool. A bit different to nylon, where you've got to fill the spool almost to the limb to get maximum casting distance. The second thing is, particularly when you're casting, when you bring the bail arm over, bring it over with your hand, and always check that you've got no loops when the bail arm comes over. I bring the bail arm over manually now every time. I don't wind the handle to get the reel into action. So knock the bail arm over with your hand and make certain as you do that there are no coils of line overlapping the edge of the spool like this. Otherwise, next time you cast, surely it'll come off with a knot, and knots in this fine soft braid are very difficult to unpick. There is one other small disadvantage with this stuff. Essentially, these braids are made of lots of very thin fibres, a bit like dental floss. They're fantastically strong. This is 30-pound braid, and it's about the thickness of 6-pound nylon. However, if it rubs against rocks or sharp surfaces, when the line is tight, it's quite liable to snap. Under normal pulling pressure of a fish, virtually impossible to break, so you've got to be very careful not to get your fingers tangled in it, in fact. But if it pulls tight over rocks, it will sometimes go with very little warning. Just one other thing worth mentioning with this stuff, you'll notice that I've actually attached the braid to the lure with a piece of nylon. Now, that's not for any particular reason, it doesn't make it less visible to the fish, I don't think, or anything like that. However, if the lure was to fold back in the cast onto the nylon, it doesn't get tangled up in it. If it folds back directly onto the braid, if you've got the braid tied directly to the lure, there's a possibility that the hook will go through between the fine strands and actually damage the line itself. So when I'm fishing, I normally just put a short length of nylon between the braid and the lure. You need a special knot really, or not the usual nylon knots, to attach the braid to the nylon. I'll loop the nylon first of all with a sort of figure of 8 knot on it to keep the loop in, and then the braid's attached to that loop with a Albright knot, which is about 12 turns of braid round the loop, and it pulls up tight, and it will, in fact, it's as strong as anything. That's been in there for several days now, and it shows no signs of weakness at all. Very neat knot, no problem. You don't need to cut the braid off absolutely at the last. You can leave 1/4 inch in there, it won't make any difference. It's so soft it just lies down, nothing. And the other end you can use any normal nylon knot to attach to the lure. These days, in fact, you see, I favour just an on-slip loop knot at the head of the lure. It's a good secure knot, and it actually doesn't need any clips or swivels or anything like that, so it's cheap, and that's something that really appeals to me.